How are the children? She asked. How are the children? A group of multi-faith people, justice-seeking people, had gathered down at our southern border, outside a nondescript detention center where hundreds, if not thousands, of children were being held. They had been torn from their parents. Have all our children left? Yes? Yeah? One or two there? Yeah? This group had refused to remain silent in the face of this injustice. How are the children? Reverend Tracy Blackman asked. She's the executive minister in the United Church of Christ, the minister for justice and witness. She was demanding that we see the horrific treatment of these human beings. These human beings that have this Christ essence within them, this light, the stardust of our God. She named all the attention that the agitators had been receiving as this group was gathered. Folks were taking their pictures, the media had showed up, and she asked, how is it that such attention is being given to them, and yet we couldn't match a child's picture with the photo of their parents or maybe even their name? How are the children? She says we come as Jesus' friend, Jesus who reminds us, possibly demands us, that we need to do much better, reminding ourselves of our humanity, of that God presence within each of us, and then having policies and laws that honor that presence. She says she comes as a friend of God to remind us that there are over 12,000 children being held. And there was another news story, I imagine it was true, that we've lost track of another 1,000 children. Can you imagine? This nation of ours has lost its soul. It's disaligned. It's non-aligned. It's out of line with God's dream, with God's very heartbeat. So here's the good news. Y'all still with me? Here's the good news. As our scripture today, as Jesus is walking with his disciples, he asks us to start seeing the resurrection. He asks us to start seeing new life. He asks us to start seeing the possibilities grounded in the reality that inside you and inside me and inside all of our children and people is this essence of God, is this light that ties us all together. To start seeing new life and new paradigms and new possibilities. Jesus' time that was rampant with this fear and this violence and this desire to separate people into groups about who had worth and who had value. And into that, Jesus asks his disciples to start seeing the resurrection. They're walking along, and Jesus, being the master teacher that he knows the power of repetition, because sometimes we need to hear things once or twice or 3 times before it actually sinks in. And he starts telling them the truth. The Son of Man is going to be crucified. He's going to be killed. And then 3 days later, he's going to rise. And they were so confused about this, they didn't understand. And they were afraid to ask Jesus what he meant. This was the second time in Mark's gospel that they had heard this. They had been so saturated with so much fear and violence, this thought that there could actually be a rising was rather audacious. And we in these days might wonder, can there really be a shift? Can there really be some new life and new eyes and new ways of seeing? Can there actually be a rising that would give us life? So then the Jesus continue on their journey. Jesus continues on his journey with the disciples, and they're chit-chatting with one another as they're heading towards Capernaum, as John so beautifully brought to life. And he asks them as they stop at this house for some food, he says, so what were y'all arguing about on the way? But they were silent because they had been arguing with one another who was the greatest. Who was the favorite child? Who was the best? Who's the favorite employee? Who's the favorite of Jesus? Now, we need to give the disciples a whole lot of grace here because we are them. We are the ministers when we ministers gather and we talk about how full our sanctuary is and how many new members we've gotten, yes? We want to know who's the greatest. It's that professional team meeting, right, when you talk about the measurable outcomes and how the quarter was very profitable. Who is the greatest among us? It's when we gather to talk about our children and how jam-packed their schedules are and how they're rising to the top of their class, which I'm sure all of your children are, and that is fantastic because we want to know who is the greatest. So here's a sneak peek, y'all, to October when we start talking about James and John's, the son of Zebedee, and what happened to Zebedee as a family name. Wouldn't that have caught on? I guess not. So we're going to talk about, in about 3 weeks, depending on what's going on in the world, the plan is for us to talk about in 3 weeks, right? We're going to talk about the sons of Zebedee, James and John, who go to Jesus and they say, you know what? We want to sit one at the right hand and one at the left hand in all your glory. They wanted to be the greatest. And Dr. Martin Luther King says, that is what we call the drum major instinct. We all want to be great. And Dr. King says there's nothing wrong with that. You need to be great in whatever gifts you have and expertise and boldness in that greatness and invite other people to be great in who they are too. It's being great for Jesus, seeing that Christ light within you and inviting that in other people too. So that's the sneak peek. So let's give the disciples some grace, yes? Because we all have the desire, and as long as we're funneling towards the goodness and the alignment of God's dream, we're doing well. So Jesus, he's offering his disciples another lens, another possibility about a resurrection-filled paradigm, another possibility of what greatness looks like. And it's totally countercultural. It's totally countercultural in a time when greatness was measured in terms of access to power and lordship over people, and laws and policies that kept people separated one from another and kept a hierarchy of who had worth and who didn't. That's how greatness was, sometimes still is, defined. And into that Jesus breathes this. They're gathered together and he sits down. And when Jesus sits down, you know this is not just a casual conversation. This is Jesus stepping into his role as a Jewish teacher. And he gathers his disciples together and he calls a child into the group. Now, us valuing our children, we're going to miss part of this, so I just need to unpack it a little bit more. And we don't know if this child was a girl or a boy because the Greek word for child is gender neutral, which is fascinating in itself, isn't it? And yet that vocabulary let us know whether it was a boy or a girl, that child didn't have much worth. So we have all these adults gathered around Jesus that were most likely adult males, and they're focused on their alpha male, trying to vie to see who can get close and be like this Jesus. And he brings a child into this group, and children at this time had no consequence. They were literally invisible in plain sight. And he brings this child and he said, whoever wants to be first must be last and servant of all. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me, and whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me. Jesus, in essence, is asking these disciples, do you see this child? This child that has no worth, no value. Do you see this child? Not the literal sense. Sure, I see the child. Do you see the Christ essence? Do you see this God-given inherent worth in this child? Jesus is asking this child to be the stand-in for him. To welcome this child is to welcome Jesus. To welcome Jesus is to welcome the God who sent Jesus. Now, y'all, let's not get caught in the sugary sweet. Aren't our children wonderful? Can we name that? We know that's true. Did you see them all? Wasn't that beautiful visually? Just the gorgeous energy that they bring? Yes, they are. Yet Jesus is pointing us to something deeper, a resurrection reality. To welcome the child, to welcome that essence, to see that child, is to welcome Jesus. Anybody read any of Sue Grafton's mysteries? Wasn't she the one that did the ABCD? Yes. So it turns out that in one of her mysteries, there was a murderer who was a 60-year-old woman who was 30 pounds overweight. And after the mystery was solved, the detective reflects that the woman nearly got away with this crime because no one would remember seeing someone like her. Nothing about her made her noticeable. She was, for all practical purposes, invisible. In plain sight, invisible. I know when I need an experience of being invisible, I take my sturdy woman body with my gorgeous gray, sparkly, whitish hair, and I go to the local hardware store. And I go and I stand at the counter with my question. And I don't know if I've entered into a different, nothing against the hardware stores, y'all, but that's just where I notice it, right? I notice it in other places too. And I stand there, and you all know I can call for some attention to me, right? And I stand there and I think, I am invisible right now. I'm trying to be noticed. I just have a simple question about the line and the weight on a fishing pole, right? That's all my question is. Invisible in plain sight. Jesus this morning is asking us to move from that literal, right? He's pointing us to the children, and yet it's what these children represent. He wants these disciples to see something they didn't even know they were missing. He's asking us to start seeing the invisible in our midst. Not because we're virtuous, not because we want to congratulate ourselves for being the greatest. It's because to receive those that are deemed invisible is to welcome this Jesus. And what we're doing is we're seeing the essence of God's very presence within us and in one another. So I'm going to put you all back up in your heads. You ready? In your daily life, who is crossing your path that is invisible? That Jesus is asking you to see. And in so seeing, hopefully valuing that person's experience and who they are. Who is the invisible Jesus that you need to see? Who are those invisible ones right before us that are being cast aside? In these days in which we live, it is a radical upending to take this understanding of greatness. For this aligns us with God's dream. It puts us into alignment with the way God would have us be. If you want to see what this looks like, I invite you, I invite you in a few moments, when the offering plate comes by, if you would like to see the immigrant, the refugee, the people who are escaping horrific, unimaginable ways of being and coming into the United States, they need our help because they have that Christ light within us. We, our community, our mission team has said we're going to collect gift cards because they need our help. So when that offering plate comes by, get out your checkbook, your credit card. We will swipe that for you if you want to contribute to that important mission of seeing our refugees, people who are here seeking asylum. This week, many of you who have shared your Me Too stories. Every time when the news starts talking about someone's story that certain people don't want to believe, there is a whole group of folks who are re-traumatized, who have experienced sexual violence in many different forms that we continue to speak out against. Yes? So if you know someone who has shared that with you, this is the time for you to reach out to them and say 3 things. I see you, I believe you, I am right here with you. And in so doing, we are witnessing that very Christ light, that God's essence within each of them. Yes, I see you, I believe you, I am right here with you. So we ask, oh God, that you would help us live more deeply into this countercultural vision of spiritual greatness, in which the leader becomes a servant, and those easily forgotten parts of society, those individuals that sit with us in the lunchroom, those people in our boardrooms with us that have been cast aside and made to be invisible, become visible. Because we're willing to see that Christ light and that essence within them. And God, let us continue being a people who then align ourselves with this dream so that our visions of greatness will shape our ethics, our political involvement, and our spirituality together, one with another. So we ask, oh God, that it would be so. Amen.